So to help us answer the first question of what does money solve for, a very useful exercise we can do is imagine a world where there is no money. In that world, we would be using a barter system of exchange. So what barter is a system of exchange where you exchange a good or service directly for another good or service. So we're not exchanging a good or service for money and then money for another good or service. We're exchanging good or service directly for good or service. So there is no money. That's what barter is. Now, how prevalent barter was is another topic. But it's the first thing usually explained in economic textbooks, and it helps understand what life would be without money, or what money solves for, really. So in that type of system, this is what you'd have. Two people who want to transact. Let's say you have some arrows and you want some chicken. You find somebody who has chicken, and you guys transact. He gets your arrows, you get the chicken, boom, both of you are happy. So there's some great things here, right? Well, first of all, instant settlement. You guys transacted, done. You don't need to see anybody. Again, you don't owe anything to anyone. There is no counterparty risk. Instant settlement, done. So that's great. But it's not all great with barter. Because what happens if you wanted the chicken, but this guy doesn't want your arrows? He doesn't need them. This is what we call the double coincidence of wants. You have to have something that somebody wants, and that person also at the same time has to have something that you want of equivalent value, which is kind of, not easy for this to happen. It's not something that's common. So what happens if this person doesn't want your arrows? Well, you gotta figure out what does he want. Okay, he wants some apples. You gotta find somebody who has apples. So here you can't transact. You go around and you find this person. Now, this person who has apples doesn't want your arrows. So then you gotta keep looking until you find the person who has apples, who wants your arrows, and then you can transact with that person. And once you're done transacting, you go back to the guy who has the chicken, tell him, hey, I have the apple. You hope he didn't sell his chicken already and he still wants apples. And if he does, then you guys can transact. Now, in this situation, this was a 3 people transaction. Now, maybe the person that, had apples didn't want your arrows, and you couldn't find any person who has apples who wanted your arrows. Maybe somebody wanted shovels because, they work, they farm. So then you would have to find somebody who has shovels, who wants your arrows, and it would be a 4 people transaction. And you can imagine how crazy this would be the more people there are and the more products there are. It becomes unmanageable. So barter is extremely hard, especially in a growing society. So it's not very efficient. Imagine spending more than half your day trying to exchange every time you want a good or service. So barter has too many problems. First of all is the one we just talked about, which is the double coincidence of wants. But that's not all. There's also a lack of common measuring value. How many arrows for an apple? How many arrows for a shoe? How many arrows for a chair? What's the exchange rate between everything? It's a little bit hard to do compared to what we have now. If we're using dollars, we know everything in dollars. So we don't need to compare what's the price of an apple in terms of oranges. We can compare everything in terms of dollars, and thus we can compare all of them. So the the lack of common measuring value is a problem of barter as well. There's also the lack of divisibility. If you make shoes and you want an apple, well, can you just trade half a shoe? Not really. So again, another problem with trading goods and services directly for goods and services. And then the lack of store of value. If you have apples, well, you got to exchange them right away because they're going to go bad. It's a perishable good. So all of these problems here are related to barter. And you can really see already that money solves for all of these. So in the next lecture, what we're going to answer is, what does money really solve for? So what does money solve for? In the previous lecture, we looked at barter. We looked at how life would look like without money. But under the barter system, what were people trying to do at the end of the day? They were trying to exchange value for value, a good or service for another good or service. So they're trying to move value. And that's what money solves for. It enables us to move that value, which is hard to do if we're exchanging good or service for good or service. Because for us to do that properly under a barter system, we both need to have what the other person wants. We both need to have the exact quantities for it to be a fair value and be at the same place and location as one another. But when does that happen? So we're trying to exchange value across 3 different spaces: across time, across space, and across scale. Now let me explain. When you're moving value or a good or service or your surplus, because at the end of the day, when you're trading something, you're trading your surplus, right? The person trading arrows, he's trading the extra arrows that he's not going to use himself. The person trading the apples is only trading the apples that they're not consuming themselves. The person trading hours of work are trading the hours of work that they're not using for themselves. So it's always surplus. So when you're trading a good or service for another good or when you're just trading a good or service, you're trading this value for somebody else's equivalent value. You're trading it across these 3 spaces. Now, let's have a real life example today. If I'm working at McDonald's, for example, when I get paid in money. I don't get paid in Big Macs because I'm at McDonald's, I get paid in money. So I can then move and spend that money anywhere else. I can move that value in space. I don't need to spend it right where I am. I can go next door. I can go across the country and spend it. So I can move this value in space. Now, I also don't need to spend it right away. I can spend it tomorrow. I can spend it next week. I can spend it next year. So I can move this value in time as well. I can spend it whenever I want because it's my money. Nobody can tell me it's my property. So I can spend it where I want to and when I want to. Now I also don't need to spend all of it, right? I can spend just, $5 because I want to get something small, or I can add it up with other monies that I have accumulated and buy something bigger. So I can also move the value in scale. This is what money solves for. And you can imagine the difference between a barter system and money. In a barter system, it's hard to move value in space, depending on what you have. It's hard to move it in time because something might just go bad. It's hard to move value in scale. If you have a shoe, you can't cut it in half and just exchange half of it. Money solves all of these issues. So instead of going around and trying to find somebody who has the same thing in the same location at the same time in the same proportion, which you would be doing in barter, you can just exchange for money with anybody. And all that time savings that you're having, you can spend them on being more productive in what you're doing. So the person making arrows can just make more arrows instead of wasting their time trying to transact. And the person making apples, also the same thing. So you would make more arrows, the person would make more apples, everybody would make more of everything, and we would all just be richer. Money solves for that. Money is great. It solves for all of these things. It solves for moving value across time, across space, and across scale. So if money solves for moving value in time, in space, and in scale, then what makes for the best form of money? Well, that's easy. It's the money that moves the best in time, in space, and in scale. If that's what I'm trying to solve for, then I would want the money that's best at doing those. So let me explain. Here we're going to be looking at a concept called salability. This concept comes from the economic school of thought. And it's a concept we're often going to be coming back to throughout this course. So it's important that we explain it correctly here. What is salability? So salability is how well something can be sold while incurring very little loss, while maintaining the most of its value. So salability is going to be on a scale. So something can be more saleable or something can be less saleable. And it can be on different planes. So we can look at salability across time. And if we look at salability across time, let's imagine we want to use oranges as money. Are oranges time saleable? Not really. They would be low on the salability scale of time. Why? Because they go bad. They don't preserve their value across time. If I want to use them today or tomorrow, that's great. Next week. But if I want to use them in 2 months, they would have gone bad. They're a perishable good. So they're not going to keep their value across time. They're going to shed. And we don't want that. If one of our objectives is to move value in time, then we want the money that preserves its value in time. So if I'm using gold, for example, gold keeps its value in time. You can keep a piece of gold in your closet for 100 years. It'll still be the same piece of gold. I can keep a piece of gold in my closet for 10,000 years. Come back, check up on it. It's going to be the same piece of gold. It's not going to shed. It's not going to lose any of its value. And that's important. So the best money between these two, gold would be a better money because it keeps its value across time. And I want to solve for moving value in time. So it's the thing that loses the least amount of value across one of these spaces. Here we're talking about time. Now, if you have a hard time with the word salability, you can use navigability. How well something navigates in time. Do oranges navigate well in time? No. Does gold navigate well in time? Yes. So it's really the same thing. So if we're looking at another space, let's say salability in space. So how well does a product move in space? For example, if we use chickens, can we use chickens as money? Are chickens space saleable? Well, let's think about it. I want to buy something with a chicken. What am I going to do? Put a chicken in my pocket? Hard to transport a chicken. If I want to buy something with 10 chickens, how am I even going to do that? So chickens are not very space saleable. There's costs involved in moving them. So there's value lost in that transaction, in that movement. If I want to use cowrie shells as money, well, cowrie shells are pretty small. Can put them in my pockets. Can make a necklace out of them and walk around with them. So that's pretty space saleable. Very little loss or cost in that movement. You know, if you're transacting and you're sending money to somebody that's far away, and you're incurring a lot of costs, there's a big fee to transact, that's not space saleable. You want the money with the least amount of loss as you're moving it in space, right? So you want the one that's highest on the salability scale because you want to be able to move it in time and in space with the least amount of loss possible. Also in scale, imagine we're using cows as money. Can we do that? Not really. If I want to buy something small, can I cut a piece of the cow up and just use that to transact? Doesn't work. So it's not very scale saleable. On the other hand, gold, very scale saleable. I can cut a piece of gold at room temperature with just any household goods items. It's very easy to do. So here gold would be very scale saleable. And that's what we would want from money. We want the money that's the highest on the salability scale, because that's what we were trying to solve for. So if we take a look here at the relationship between what money solves for and what is the best form of money, we can see the link. If we want to move, if one of our objectives is to move value in time, then we want the money that is the most time saleable. If one of our objectives is to move value in space, then we want the money that is the most space saleable. And if we want to be able to move value in scale, then we would want the money that is the most scale saleable. So here we figured out two things already. We figured out what money solves for, and because of that, we figured out what would make the best form of money for us to use. So having gone over salability and understanding that the best form of money is the one that's the most saleable across time, space, and scale, we can now turn our attention to properties and characteristics of money. So what are characteristics and properties? Well, characteristics is how we view something. Properties is how something is. For example, a characteristic of gold is that it's shiny. So we view it as being shiny. But that's subjective. It's up for debate, right? And it's relative to other things. Maybe we find something that's more shiny and we stop viewing gold as being shiny. Now, a property of gold, on the other hand, would be something like it melts at 1064 degrees Celsius. That's a property. It's quantifiable. It's undeniable. It's not up for debate. It's what it is. So here, that's the difference between properties and characteristics. So if we look at characteristics first, what would be a characteristic of money that we would want? Well, let's start here. If we want a money that solves for moving value in time, and thus we want one that's the most time saleable, that loses the least amount of value when being moved in time, has the least amount of friction, then we would want a money that we view as being a good store of value. We wouldn't want to use the money that doesn't store its value because that's what we want from money. So we need to view it as being a good store of value. Otherwise, we wouldn't even consider it as being money. Now, we also need to view it as being a good medium of exchange because we want to be able to move our value in space with the least amount of loss. So if it's not a medium of exchange and nobody's accepting, it's not widely accepted, there's going to be losses in transacting with it, and we don't want that. So we want to view it as a good medium of exchange. That's so something that everybody's going to accept. We also want to view it as a good unit of account. We want to be able to account for things in it and spend the exact amount for that thing, because it's one of the things we want to solve for is moving value in scale with the least amount of loss. So we want to view money, or we want the money that we view as having these characteristics, as being a good store of value, as being a good medium of exchange, and as being a good unit of account. Now, if you go on Google and you just write, what is money? You just search for what is money. You'll often get, you'll get the characteristics of money. So let's take a look at this one, International Monetary Fund. To put it different way, money is something that holds its value over time. So that's store of value. Can be easily translated into price. So that's unit of account. And is widely accepted. So that's medium of exchange. So often when you are searching for what is money, you get the characteristics of money. Now, we're going to learn that that's not exactly what money is. We haven't answered our question yet of what is money. But often when you search for what is money, you're going to get the characteristics. But that's how we view money. That's how money functions in a way. It's not exactly what it is. So how do we view money as being a good store of value, a good medium of exchange, and as a unit of account? Well, we view it because of its properties. We view it that way because of its properties. So let's get into properties. What are properties then? Well, if we want to view something as being a good store of value, then it needs to have a property of being durable. For example, if let's say we want to use blueberries as money, blueberries aren't durable. I don't know for you, but blueberries in my fridge, 1 week tops. Then they go bad. So it's not durable. It wouldn't store value. On the other hand, a diamond, that's pretty durable. Diamonds last forever, right? So that would store value. So the characteristics are derived from the properties. Something needs to have specific properties for us to view it that way. Like we would never view blueberries to store value. You couldn't pay me enough to believe that. It's just impossible. But being durable isn't enough. Being physically hard and not shedding and not losing, not shedding or not losing any value physically isn't enough. It also has to require work to produce more of. Because if you can create diamonds out of thin air, it doesn't matter how durable it is. There's going to be so many diamonds that it's not going to hold its value. It's not going to store value. So it also requires, more importantly, it requires work to produce more of. It has to require a lot of work to produce more of. If you can create some of it with no work, then it's not going to store value because you will be able to create an infinite amount of, or a huge amount of that, it's not going to store value. So these are properties that are required for these characteristics. Now, if we look at a medium of exchange, well, it needs the property of being portable. Can I put it in my pocket? If I can't, then it's not really portable and it's going to be hard to be a good medium of exchange. It also needs to have the property of being verifiable. Or auditable in a way. Can I know for sure that what I'm getting is a legit unit? It's not fake. For example, cowrie shells. You couldn't falsify cowrie shells at the time. So when somebody paid you in a cowrie shell, you knew it's a real one. It's a real cowrie shell. It's not a fake. So these are important properties for us to derive these characteristics. We wouldn't see something as a good medium of exchange if we can't transport it easily and verify that it's authentic easily. Now, for being a unit of account, we would want something that's fungible. For example, if I'm looking at money and I take a $20 bill and another $20 bill, these two $20 bills are fungible. They're the same. I don't care if I get this one or I get this one. It's the same thing. But if this one was a little bit different than this one and they had different values, they wouldn't be fungible. And then I wouldn't value this one as much as this. And I would have to calculate values. I wouldn't be able to calculate everything in dollar units because every dollar unit is different than another one. So it would have to be fungible for us to view it as a good unit of account. It would also have to be divisible. If we can't divide it up and spend only portions, then it's going to be hard to account for things in it, especially if it's large. So these are properties from which these characteristics are derived. So if we come back here and we look at our chart and we add the characteristics here, and then we add the properties, what we come to realize is everything is derived from the properties. If we have something that requires a lot of work to produce, so it's scarce, it's not plentiful, there's a limited amount, it requires a lot of work to produce, and it's durable, then we're going to view it as a good store of value. If something is portable and is verifiable / auditable, then we're going to view it as a good medium of exchange. If something is divisible and fungible, we're going to view it as a good unit of account. So when we talk about what's the best form of money, well, it's really the one that has the best properties.